The second annual Messiah Ballet features Handel's Messiah, performed by the St. Augustine Community Chorus and Grace Conservatory's Ballet Company. Saturday, November 16th at the Jacksonville Center for the Performing Arts. More at messiahballet.org.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and on today's First Coast Connect, from carrying the nuclear football to transforming toxic workplaces, we talked to the man nicknamed Navy Bob about his new book on leading with love. Then our election coverage continues with incumbent Jacksonville Beach Mayor Chris Hoffman. She explains why she wants a second term and takes your calls and questions. Plus, legendary cellist Dave Eggar rousens up his unique mix of bluegrass and classical music for an in-studio preview of his performance at Friday Musicale. Join our conversation. Send your questions or comments to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org or tag us on social media or call us at 904-549-2937. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. In-person early voting starts today in the swing state of North Carolina. Elections officials and voters in the western part of the state have had to adapt to the devastating effects of Hurricane Helene. From member station WUNC, Rusty Jacobs reports.
In the McDowell County town of Old Fort, flooding from the Catawba River damaged roads and bridges. So the local elections board decided not to use the Old Fort Depot as one of the county's two early voting sites. That leaves the elections office 9 miles down the interstate as the county's sole early voting site. Still, County Elections Director Kim Wellborn believes turnout this year will be strong for early voting and Election Day, just as it was 4 years ago.
Everybody has that spirit of it's my right and it's my honor to vote.
In 2020, 65% of North Carolina voters statewide cast ballots in person during early voting. For NPR News, I'm Rusty Jacobs in Durham.
Vice President Harris will be campaigning across Wisconsin today, stopping in 3 cities. Former President Donald Trump has no campaign events scheduled today. He will attend a charity dinner in New York tonight. For weeks, Republican vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance has not directly answered the question of whether he believes Trump lost the presidential election in 2020. Yesterday, he gave his answer to supporters at a rally in Williamsport, Pennsylvania.
On the election of 2020, I've answered this question directly a million times. No. I think there are serious problems in 2020. So did Donald Trump lose the election? Not by the words that I would use.
During the vice presidential debate, Vance had also avoided answering that when he was questioned by his opponent, Democrat Tim Walz. Walz had called Vance's response a, quote, damning non-answer. Walz will be campaigning in North Carolina today. He will be joined by former President Bill Clinton. President Biden has announced his administration has hit a federal student loan milestone. It has now approved more than 1 million public service workers for loan forgiveness. NPR's Corey Turner explains.
Congress created the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program several administrations ago. What the Biden administration did was make it work. Many teachers, nurses, and police officers had fulfilled their required 10 years of public service, only to be told they didn't qualify because they had the wrong kind of loan or the wrong repayment plan. PSLF was truly unforgiving in 2021 when the Biden administration said it would overhaul the program, making it easier to navigate and to qualify for relief. With Biden's broader efforts now blocked or delayed by the courts, PSLF stands out as a rare success in his years-long fight to forgive student debt. Corey Turner, NPR News.
And you're listening to NPR News from Washington.
And the time is now 4 minutes after 9 o'clock. This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. As we just heard, President Joe Biden waived an additional $4.5 billion in student debt today for over 60,000 borrowers who are public service workers. Danielle Pryor has more on how this affects Florida.
The Floridians who stand to benefit from this latest round of loan cancellations are teachers, firefighters, law enforcement officers, nurses, and service members. U.S. Department of Education Undersecretary James Quall says this kind of loan forgiveness is life-changing.
We're talking here about people who've decided that instead of chasing higher salaries, they want to give back to their communities. Many times that makes student debt a huge burden for them.
With the additional loan forgiveness, more than 55,000 public service workers in Florida have had student loans canceled under the Biden administration. Florida's 2nd District, which is in the Panhandle, is in the top 5 congressional districts in the country with the most student loan forgiveness. In Orlando, I'm Danielle Pryor.
The Army Corps of Engineers has added Flagler County to Operation Blue Roof following Hurricane Milton. Operation Blue Roof is a free service that allows eligible homeowners to receive help with temporary roof repairs in the wake of a storm. Residents can sign up for help at blueroof.gov. Temperatures in Jacksonville now in the low 50s. It's going to be windy today with sunshine. Highs will be in the upper 60s. Clear and mid-50s overnight.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Indeed, designed to be an end-to-end hiring solution for businesses of all sizes to attract, interview, and hire candidates, all from one platform. Learn more at Indeed.com/NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, the man nicknamed Navy Bob by George W. Bush says the former president was one of many bosses who taught him leadership through love. We talked to him about his new book and life commanding a nuclear submarine. Later, our election coverage continues with incumbent Jacksonville Beach Mayor Chris Hoffman. But first, there's nothing like 8 years underwater to teach you leadership under pressure. My guest, Robert Ronska, his new book is Beyond the Sea and focuses on combating toxic workplaces with love. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you so much. Such an honor and pleasure to be here.
It's a delight to have you. You have an amazing story to tell, but let's start with a nickname and get that out of the way. President Bush named you.
He did. He named a lot of people, and he finally, that's how one of the things he led with love, he nicknamed you. And so one day we were doing some bike maintenance, and he asked his personal aide, he says, "Who helped you?" And he went down the list, and he said, "Bob." And he says, "Bob who?" And he says, Navy Bob, because I was and that stuck with me ever since.
You used to ride bikes with the president.
We did. And he loves to tell the story. We were at the Beijing Olympics, and so we got to test ride the actual course, and I took a fall. It was and he loved it. There was a picture of me at the end and him holding me and pointing to the injury. And so he just loved that. And so, yes, I used to ride at Camp David, used to ride at Beltsville, all throughout. Whenever we used to travel, he used to ride bikes.
Your title was Navy Aide to the President?
It was the Naval Aide to the President, which carried the nuclear codes primarily, but it was other duties, responsibilities, such as ceremonial aid, and basically you protected the president. You were in charge of all the military assets when you were on the road, to include Air Force One, Marine One, and all the services, military services to support his safety.
And that nuclear code that you refer to, that's kind of called the nuclear football sometimes?
It is. There's a briefcase that has to be around the president at all times to ensure deterrence, and so that we can respond if needed to be able to prevent future wars.
I mean, that's an extraordinary responsibility. Was it nerve-wracking for you to be carrying that about?
It was. And so my first assignment was in the nuclear Navy was on a ballistic missile submarine, USS West Virginia. So I saw the responsibility on a ballistic missile submarine, and then to carry the nuclear codes to be able to execute that and to know what devastation that could actually occur and be responsible for potential facilitating Armageddon. Yes, it was a stressful job.
So you were on the Virginia. That was a nuclear powered submarine, but also a nuclear armed submarine.
There's two types of submarines in the Navy. There's a ballistic missile submarine, which they carry the nuclear warheads, which is part of the nuclear triad. They have ICBMs and bombers and submarines. But then there's another submarine called a fast attack, and I was on both of them. And I commanded the USS Texas, which was a fast attack.
Wow. So you were 28 years in the Navy. As you say, you commanded nuclear power fast attack submarines, including the Texas. In this book, your first lessons in leadership were really sort of what not to do. Um, you you provide some examples. Maybe you can give our listeners one of those.
Sure, there was one. My first submarine was a toxic work environment. I came home and I told my wife, I said, "Don't let me stay in the Navy one more day than I have." This is when I first started out when I was 23 years old. And then someone came in, new leader, and he showed me compassion and love. And so I stuck it out. And then I really found this secret of leading with love underneath Captain Bruce Grooms, my second commanding officer. And he taught me that you can lead with love in a professional environment. And so that was that contrast of knowing how not to act and the impact of safety and all outcomes compared to my second tour was leading with love, and it was just a magical culture. Outcomes exceeded all expectations. He became a legendary leader, and you built a legendary culture. So yes, that contrast was so important.
So I've seen you say that you decided to write this book based on a hypothesis you had about the fact that people in your business all kind of went to the same school, they worked on the same machines, in many ways had similar experiences on the job, and yet there were really profound differences in outcomes, including some fairly high profile accidents that occurred on some submarines.
So absolutely. And so the nuclear Navy, we've never had a reactor accident in over 75 years of operation. And like you mentioned, everyone goes to the same schools, everyone uses the same procedures, everyone uses the same equipment. And yet we've had accidents. And this was my hypothesis as a prospective commanding officer instructor, which was one of my assignments before I took right after command. I got to ride a lot of submarines, and I would go on these submarines and I would see such a difference. And the only thing that was different was the culture and leadership. It was a homogeneous pool of sailors, and they were all gone through the same school, but yet there was such a impact and difference in performance and outcomes. And then I went to get my doctorate at Rollins College, and I studied leadership. And so I put this hypothesis to test. And there is over 50 years of academic research that demonstrates that if you develop authentic, caring relationships, all outcomes will exceed all expectations. And that was proving my hypothesis.
And having an accident, I mean, these accidents didn't disrupt the nuclear function of the submarines. There was one, I believe, that was a collision with a Japanese fishing vessel many, many years ago that killed a bunch of people. There was an incident where a Navy vessel actually ran into kind of an underground mountain. But because it's a nuclear vessel, the potential for harm is so great. I mean, that's not unlike a nuclear reactor, or there is a presence of that same function.
Oh, absolutely. So these collisions, you can damage the nuclear reactor, and so yes, there's harm, but what the nuclear reactor, what it is that even though that culture is there in some points, there's such a rigorous inspection. They look for drift that it kind of prevents that. And I would say in some of these submarines, they've been lucky, and hope is not a plan. And so I think that the culture that the nuclear Navy has instilled is so important. But what you do is you get drift up forward, and you have these accidents.
Yeah. So leading with love is an interesting concept. It seems sort of anathema in some ways to the Navy or the military in general, or even just the workplace. So explain what you mean by love.
So when I started researching this book, it took me 5 years to write this. I didn't have love in my vocabulary. And so through my research, I looked back and I I found what was the best way to describe this. And so in the book, first was my aha moment. I was behind enemy lines, thousands of miles from my home port, doing a mission vital to national security in the backyard and a stone throws away from the most capable adversary submarine that is out there. And we thought we were counter detected, which means they found us. And if they knew we were there, they would have done everything they possibly could to have us surface so they can take pictures so that we would be on USA Today. And if you look at the cost of each submarine doing this to the taxpayer dollars, it was about $100 million, the $2 billion submarine. And my executive officer, it's in the book, Gary Montalvo, spoke up and preventing us from leaving. And I look back on, it was a 99% chance that I thought they had us and I was ready to get out of there. And we would have lost $100 million of this national, but money was not the main concern. But why did he speak up? Why did he jeopardize his reputation and his professional development? And there's no other way that I can explain it is love. He had my back at the cost of his own, because if he was wrong, his professional judgment would have been in question, because I had his back at the cost of my own, which means I define love as sacrificially giving of oneself for the benefit of others. And the Navy SEALs, I also talk about this in the book. I was fortunate or privileged to deploy with SEAL Delivery Team 1 on my third submarine.
And explain what a SEAL delivery team is, because not everybody knows.
So a SEAL Delivery Team 1, there's SEAL teams on the East Coast and West Coast. So SEAL Team 6 was the SEAL team that did the raid on Osama bin Laden. SEAL Delivery Team 1 is in San Diego, and they would deploy with this little James Bond submarine. They're known as SEAL Delivery Team. And they would put this little James Bond submarine on the back of a submarine as a bus to go out to some undisclosed location to let them do their mission.
And you're escorting them there, essentially.
We're escorting them there on the submarine. So for 2 months, I really got to see the culture of SEAL Delivery Team 1. And during this time when we were deploying with them, if anyone has seen the movie Lone Survivor, that same team with Michael Murphy and Marcus Luttrell, their team was on my submarine, majority of them. And so what happens in Lone Survivor is, if anyone hasn't seen the movie, Michael Murphy, they're behind enemy lines in Afghanistan, and they get found. They get found that they were there. And so the next thing they see them surrounded by incredible gunfire, and Michael Murphy, knowing that everyone was going to die, risked his life, or knew he was going to die. He goes on this ridge and makes a phone call to get in reinforcements.
Goes on a ridge, sort of like high up enough
so he can get communication. They didn't have satellite communications with the Iridium phone. And so he makes the phone call. So he saves the other people. And there's one survivor, and that's the title of the movie, Lone Survivor. So fast forward 3 years later, now I'm the naval aide to the president. I'm on stage supporting President Bush posthumously give the Medal of Honor to Michael Murphy's parents. And who's in the audience is Marcus Luttrell, the lone survivor. There wasn't a dry eye in the East Room. And the point is this, that you think about love as kind of touchy feeling. It's not. Love is sacrificially giving of oneself for the benefit of others. And if you think about, here's a guy that used to command a nuclear submarine, in charge of 10 nuclear submarines as a Commodore, carried the nuclear codes. We talked about potentially responsible for Armageddon. And then the Navy SEALs. When you think of Navy SEALs, some would not think of love, of how talented they are. But there's no other way to explain Michael Murphy and what he did. Sacrificially giving of oneself. There's no greater sacrifice than giving one's life for his fellows. So love is the only way I can explain this.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to the author and former Navy Commander, Navy Bob Bronska, ahead of his author talk tomorrow at Story and Song Bookstore in Fernandina Beach. You can join our conversation by calling 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. We've got an email from Mark. He says, the best CO I ever worked for was Commander Lanny King. His motto was, catch them doing something right.
So I love that. And so I've spent 5 years in healthcare. In healthcare, there's a different culture that we need to change. And the culture that needs to be changed needs to be adopted in the nuclear Navy. And one of the reasons why the nuclear Navy is so safe is that we call that when you have an error, we celebrate it. Instead of finding fault with people, we celebrate it, which means we celebrate that it could have been much worse. And so we get around the table, we talk about even how minor it is, we celebrate it so that we can prevent something more catastrophic to happen in the future. So what he's saying there is that you celebrate small order deficiencies before they become big ones. And Captain Grooms that I mentioned earlier used to say all the time, it's not what happens to you, it's what you do to make sure it doesn't happen again. And the nuclear Navy was, during the deep dive of the Challenger in 1986, 73 seconds after launch, they went in and did an investigation of why the Challenger exploded, one of the most national tragic events. And what they found is it was the O-ring. Everyone knows about the O-ring, but it was much deeper than that. There were so many smaller order deficiencies because they didn't celebrate them and fix them that when it came time to the O-ring, they let it go. And what they concluded is the probability of a catastrophic event is directly proportional to the number of smaller order deficiencies. So what he was saying is building this culture where you celebrate this and you find that you want to just fix everything and not blame people for making a mistake. This is the culture that's why he became a legendary culture, because he led with love.
We've got a call from Emily in Riverside. Good morning, Emily. Go ahead.
Good morning. How are you?
Great. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Emily.
Hi, Bob. I just wanted to comment and thank you for writing this book. My brother was a Cold War submariner on nuclear submarines. He retired as a senior Eggar, and he retired at the Dolphin. He wanted to live in San Diego. But his stories reflect so much of what you're saying and what you wrote in your book, and I just wanted to thank you. He was on a team that created, they found and they re-welded a World War II era submarine rescue pod when the Russian sub sank in the Baltic. And he was ready to go, but unfortunately politics intervened and they didn't go. But his whole life in the Navy is reflected in what you're talking about today. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Emily. And I'm asking you a favor, and everyone that's listening, help me spread this word and make this world a better place. Leading with love, there's no doubt in my mind this world needs love more than any time. And what you experienced with your family is really special. And we need to duplicate this across America. And this book is applicable to any person at any age aspiring to be a leader or is a current leader in any industry. And if you're aspiring to take your leadership to the next level, to unbelievable heights, there's a roadmap and practical examples in this book. So thank you so much, Emily, for the call.
And you made a point, this is not an opportunity for you to tell, kind of quote unquote war stories. It's an opportunity for you to explain how you learned these lessons of leadership. But the stories are pretty intense. There's one in the book where you talk about being in the frigid waters in the Denmark Strait, the same place that the Titanic sank because of an iceberg, and you're trying to navigate those waters. Tell us a little bit about that incident and what happened.
So I'm glad you brought this up. And so where I put this to test is that I talked about my XO speaking up in that critical environment.
And your XO is your commanding officer?
My XO was my second in command when I was captain of this.
So you're over the XO?
I am.
Okay.
He's second. I was 42 years old. He's 32. And so this is the tail end of my command tour, the USS Texas. But it wasn't always like that. And so when I first took over the Texas in 2009, we were the worst performing ship in the squadron of 10. It was playing whack-a-mole. Every day it would be a serious whack-a-mole game. I didn't know it wasn't a question of if, it was when and where we'd have another issue. And this was so much higher than any other ship that I've been on. And so I didn't go to start punishing people like you do in traditional leadership. I looked myself in the mirror and I said, what am I doing to be able to create this culture, or what barriers or what resources they don't have? So I did something simple, In the book, I talk about doing the simple thing of asking them the crew top three. What are your top three concerns? And what I found was unbelievable barriers that the crew was happening. And that's when I knew that the crew didn't care for the ship because the ship didn't care for them.
And the gear wasn't sufficient. Is that right? I mean, you needed like additional computers.
So the different computers. So this is a $2 billion nuclear submarine. We could definitely afford computers. And half the computers were broken because of apathy. Just no one cared that things were broken. And so I got new computers. And I said to the crew right after I found out, it was like 2 weeks after I took over, I said, I am so sorry. I did not know you didn't have computers. And what this entailed is 2 hours extra per sailor per day that have to stay on board because of inefficiencies of computers that they couldn't be with their families. And so when I started addressing that, and they started to feel that the ship or organization cared for them, it was like 88 miles an hour in Back to the Future. All outcomes went up. And it was about 3 months later. And so some of the issues we were dealing with, we were going back to the Denmark Strait. When you go underneath the North Pole, the water is so cold that all the condensation in the interim comes out. And they're dropping on these highly energized cabinets.
You mean inside the ship?
Inside the ship. It was a rainforest inside the engine room.
Ooh.
And they could drop on these highly energized cabinets, which have vent holes that are pointing up for better circulation. And they can go on a microprocessor to cause the reactor to no longer function. And sometimes you were operating in water that for 2 days you couldn't surface because the ice was so thick. And if you lose the reactor and you can't surface because you can't operate your emergency diesel generator for supplemental power, you die, just like the Kursk. But we're also transiting the Denmark Strait, dodging these icebergs that sink the Titanic, and there were adversary submarines getting ready to come out and find us. But my biggest concern was the culture of the crew. And that is where we changed the culture by doing something, by leading with love. We went from the worst submarine to the best submarine in about 2 years. We had the highest retention, lowest turnover for 2 consecutive years in the Pacific Fleet, and we scored the highest possible grade on one of the major engineering inspections. And it wasn't me. It wasn't my ability, tactical ability, technical ability. It was this culture of leading with love and empowering the people that I served. That was the key, and it's discussed in this book.
And you continue to do that. 1, 2, 3. What are your top concerns or complaints among the crew? And it kind of has a really funny conclusion right before you step down.
Yeah. So at the end, the stack was this thick. When the computers, I won't go through it, but it was just, I had no idea. It was too easy. And I interviewed everybody, and nothing came out because I didn't formally go to them and say, what are your concerns? Like everyone has a suggestion box. Suggestion box, I was just talking to a CEO. No one uses a suggestion box because leaders, you have to be out there in front and ask them. So I routinely did this every month, crew top 3. And at the start, the stack was like this. And at the end, there was one concern after 3 years, one concern only. And I saw that on my desk and I was about to leave. The concern was there wasn't sufficient variety of hot sauces on the mess deck. I knew when I got that, I said, this is magical. This is what the subjective
We need
way.
more hot sauce.
Oh my gosh. But one thing that for the listeners out there, doing something is simple, because if you have a survey, you're not feeding back to the people, you shouldn't be doing the survey because it's actually harming your trust. Because trust is defined as having good intentions, which you'll have with leading with love, but to follow up your words with actions. And if you don't follow up your words with actions, you're not going to gain trust.
Got a call from Harold in Atlantic Beach. Good morning, Harold. Go ahead.
Good morning. I was the last Canadian to come down and fly on an exchange posting with the U.S. Navy off the carrier Forrestal here in Jacksonville. And in the Canadian Air Force, while not celebrating errors and stupid mistakes we made, it was a very open process for discussion, and there was no punitive action. Whereas when I was sitting in the wardroom, the ready room of a carrier and telling people about the dumb things I might have just done on a recent flight, all the jaws hit the ground because it was a punitive approach in the U.S. Navy at the time, and so nobody would fess up. So when you lead through fear, ultimately you may get short-term results, but you get long-term disasters.
That's a good comment, Harold. Yeah.
So Harold, I couldn't agree more. And leading with fear, you get short-term results, as you said, but you will not sustain long-lasting um, results that you need. You won't become a legendary leader. You won't build a legendary culture. And going back to the Texas, there was an inflection point about 3 months after I started caring for the crew and opening up and having this psychological safety. The crew was no longer fearful of making a mistake so that they were fearful of getting in trouble. They were fearful of making a mistake because they didn't want to let anyone else down. And when you hit that critical inflection point of changing that culture, like you said, to be able to open up and make mistakes and be honest, you're going to see your culture take off in results. So, Harold, I couldn't agree with you more. The punitive, what a lot of organizations today lead with fear, that will not work or sustain, and you will not become a legendary leader or have incredible outcomes.
Well, his book is called Beyond the Sea, Leading with Love from the Nuclear Navy to the White House and Healthcare. His name is Navy Bob Ronska, and he is going to speak tomorrow at 4 o'clock at the Story and Song Bookstore in Fernandina Beach. Bob, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure.
Up next, we ask Jacksonville Beach's first female mayor about why she wants a second term. Welcome back. After 4 years as the first woman to serve as mayor of Jacksonville Beach, Christine Hoffman is now in a fiercely contested race for a second term. Joining me to talk about her bid for re-election is Jax Beach Mayor Chris Hoffman. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Very nice to see you. So you served on the Jacksonville Beach City Council for 2 terms before you ran for mayor in 2020. What is it that you like about serving? And, what do you feel your tenure has brought to the city of Jacksonville Beach?
Sure. So, it was great to meet Navy Bob just now in the hallway there. My whole family has been in the military. It's kind of our service to country is kind of our family business. So for me, the opportunity to serve my community has always been something that I've taken advantage of, whether it was in high school, serving as the editor of my paper or the secretary of the marching band. Yes, I was in the marching band. On to as a volunteer in college, and then even in my professional career, serving in leadership roles in nonprofits, as well as a volunteer in leadership roles with organizations such as Beam, Rotary, things like that. So service to community has always just come naturally to me. When we put down our roots back in Jacksonville Beach, we really picked that as our hometown. So it was the next logical step for me was to see an opportunity for how I could further serve. So in 2012, there were 3 open positions, and I decided just to take the leap into public service. Was successful. Served for 8 years on city council. About midway through my second term, knowing that the incumbent was going to be termed out, decided to go ahead and take that next step as mayor. I love it. It has some very unique challenges. I think, especially, running for office in 2012 compared to 2024 presents some different and unique challenges. But when you really love your community that much, you love the people, the organizations that are within it, taking that next step and really truly serving in public office has been a real honor and privilege for me.
What was your instrument in band?
I was a clarinet player. I should have made you guess. Most people guess it on the nose.
So you allude to the challenges changing, running
Mhm.
for office between then and now. And I just want to ask you, can you give me an example?
Social media is a great example. The difference in how we use it between 2012 and now is dramatically different. So not even just in running, but also in serving, you have to try to stay ahead of misinformation, and it's almost impossible to do. And I think anybody who's trying to inform the community, inform the public on anything knows that. So trying to keep, and from a city perspective, trying to make sure that our communications are reaching the citizens where they are. And that is really, it's different. When I was growing up, there were 3 news channels. We all watched the same basic news. We all read the same newspaper. And now people can go to a multitude of different sites for their news, some of which are not even news sites. So trying to stay ahead of that of information, make sure the correct information is out there is a really definitely a challenge that has evolved over the past 12 years.
And you're part of organizations like Rotary, the Chamber. Do you think that people are less likely to take the chance and run for office now? Do you hear that?
I do. I think it's definitely not for the faint of heart. You're really putting yourself out there. You're exposing yourself quite a bit. I think there are still a lot of great people that are getting involved in our city more and more on our city. We have a great list of prospective candidates for our city boards, people that are taking the step to serve in some way, perhaps not in elected office. So I want to encourage people to continue to do that, to continue to get involved. But it's a challenge and it's daunting to people. So I really appreciate and respect people who do throw their hat in the ring to run for office.
If you're just joining us, we are talking to Chris Hoffman. She is the mayor of Jacksonville Beach, and she's running for re-election. And she will take your calls and questions at 904-549-2937, or you can email them to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. I want to run through just a couple of issues that have surfaced during your term. One big one was height limits. It was a very contentious issue. There was a proposal to allow one kind of city block to exceed the height limit that was imposed by residents. And you supported the idea of allowing that exceedance. It was like from 35 to 55 feet, I think.
I supported putting it on the ballot for the voters to decide. It is in our charter, so any change to that would have to go to the voters for their approval. And let me go back. So the original height amendment was put in the charter in the early 2000s. So it was a time where there was booming growth at the beaches. There were condos going up everywhere, real high rises. And if I could go back in time and ask the city leadership at that time to take this issue seriously, because what happened was the city wasn't dealing with it, and it went to the citizens to put this initiative on the ballot, and it limited the entire city to 35 feet. But what happened from there was that property owners were able to sue, and in many cases were able to earn vested rights to go higher than 35 feet. So there are still several properties, one condo building in the South End that's being built now, that are over 35 feet, and they're allowed to as a result of that initiative. So there were some unintended consequences to that. Do
you have a sense how much the city has spent defending those cases?
I don't, actually. I mean, it was so long ago, it probably wouldn't even be a relevant dollar amount at this point, because we're talking 20 years or so now.
Those suits don't continue?
No, so they sued under the Burt Harris law, which is a Florida law. So they were able to, I think they were all settled, but they gave the property owners a certain amount of height that they could go to. So if you have that granted height, you're going to go that high because you're one of the few now that can do that. So I wish it was handled by the city leadership at that time, that in a reasonable way. For example, our downtown area is all limited to 35 feet, but we have 2 buildings, the Metropolitan and Pablo Towers, that are much higher than that. So what we did put on the ballot was one property. It's right now a surface level parking lot or street level parking lot that is behind the 4 Point Sheraton, which is a hotel on the beach, and in between kind of the Walgreens and the Carrabba's there. So there was no residential impact. We are going to redevelop that into a multi-use property, including a parking garage, businesses, restaurants, things like that. So we decided to ask the voters, would they want this project to go up to 55 feet, which is comparable to Spring Hill Suites or Pier Point. So the voters said no, and that's fine. We're going to go, that property will be redeveloped at 35 feet per the charter of the city of Jacksonville Beach.
I want to ask you about that height limit. Is that 35 feet above basically the ground elevation? I'm just curious in terms of planning for a resilient future, how you encourage people to build up and still maintain that height.
Yeah, I think it is from the crown of the road is what the height is from. And that's another, we're landlocked. There's only so much land in Jacksonville Beach. So when we're talking about space for things like affordable housing. A lot of experts in that area would say go higher if you can. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, that's a charter issue. So it would have to go to the voters. The voters clearly spoke. I'm perfectly fine not bringing height back to the voters at this point.
Talk a little bit more, though, about resiliency planning. I mean, if you can't go up, what are you going to be doing? And how, as the mayor of Jacksonville Beach, can you in any way measurably inform how things are, how the city's reacting?
I can say we have done a lot in that area. We have done extremely huge projects for stormwater. We had a huge state funded project a few years ago to provide some stormwater drainage off of the A1A area in our north end of the beach. And we've done a lot of downtown stormwater work as well. One area that I'm particularly proud of is along the marsh side. We have had 3 different property owners convert land into conservation use. So when you're driving over Butler Boulevard and you look to the south, you see a lot of marsh landing houses. You look to the north, you can hardly see any houses. A lot of that land was zoned single family residential, was platted that way. But over 250 acres was acquired by the North Florida Land Trust right along the Butler Boulevard area. And then with the Adventure Landing property as well as Windward Marina, land there was also converted to conservation use. So we are vulnerable on the west side of the island. We are vulnerable on the marsh side. So having that be conserved rather than developed is really important, something we should be really proud of. 25% of the land in Jacksonville Beach is in conservation use right now, including that additional 400 acres. On the coast side, we have for decades been reinstalling the natural state of the beaches, which is the dune system. And I'm really proud of that. We look at historic pictures over at the Beaches Museum, where I'm the director, and you see a seawall, you see big granite boulders. These are not things that are going to prevent storm surge from coming into our community. But now you look at the dune system, it's fully formed the way that it's supposed to look. It's full of sea oats. And if you come out to the beach and you step on a dune, a local is going to tell you, hopefully nicely, to stay off the dunes, because we know how important that is to protecting our community from storm surge and sea level rise. We just did a renourishment a few months ago, and that was fully federally funded because FEMA was helping to restore those dunes after Ian and Nicole. So they're in very good shape. They're very well developed, and I'm really proud of what we've been able to do out there.
We're talking to Chris Hoffman. She's the mayor of Jacksonville Beach, and she's seeking re-election. If you have questions or comments, you can reach us on air at 904-549-2937, or you can email questions to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. I want to shift gears and talk public safety a little bit. There were a couple of high-profile incidents earlier this year, 3 unrelated shootings in a single night, concerns about, is there enough police presence? First of all, how do you feel that issue has been resolved, if it has been? And I want to talk a little bit about retention and hiring of officers, because the pay scale in Jax Beach for officers is not quite what the adjacent communities are.
Well, it is now. We actually, so to go back, we did one of the most important things the city government needs to do is provide for public safety. And that also includes feeling safe. So truly being safe, but also being safe. We know that if people don't feel safe in our downtown, they're not going to go. They're not going to support our restaurants and other businesses down there. So we need to make sure that we are safe and that we also feel safe. We have done a few things. I'm a big proponent of making sure that our public safety officials have the tools, time, and the training to do their jobs properly, and we need to support that. One of the things we did recently was adjust the pay scale for starting officers as all the way on up to compete with our neighboring agencies. We saw JSO go back to their pension, which had been a competitive advantage for us because we do have a pension for our police officers. So we had to make sure it's just like any other organization or company. We are competing for talent with our neighboring communities. We have done a great job with our recruiting efforts, with our onboarding, with our training, incentivizing people that come to our agency with experience, that they can bring that experience to us. So we also have installed a very great camera system through our downtown area. We've given several of our cars license plate readers, but we're also trying to prevent issues. We're trying to work with our local business owners in our downtown area to help identify issues before they become problems. We're working on restructuring our paid parking to make sure that we have more parking that is actually accounted for when we're in season and when we have the paid parking going on. So I think there's a lot of different things beyond just public safety, beyond just our police officers that we can do to enhance public safety and the feeling of safety in our downtown area.
So, is it fair to say that the Jacksonville Beach police officers are getting the same wages as adjacent Neptune Atlantic beaches, or is it still lower than
I
that?
believe that when we passed the pay scale adjustment that we became the highest paid, I believe.
Okay. And so are you seeing more retention or diminishment of the shortage that was being seen earlier this year of, maybe 20 officers down, I think, below what your police chief had
And
wanted?
that was a variety of issues. We had some people out, we had people on medical, but it was a problem. It was a lower amount of officers than we wanted or needed. We did add 4 positions, and I do feel that they are getting very close to fully staffed. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but I do feel that our police chief is optimistic that we'll get there.
One other big issue that has been contentious at the beach are the trails that are being, you're still laughing a little bit. This is the urban trail plan. I think a lot of people love the idea of an urban trail plan. It's safer for pedestrians, it's safer for cyclists. But the way this plan works is it actually steps on land that some people didn't realize was public property when they bought their home or they use it as a driveway. It's city owned right of way. But a lot of people didn't realize that and feel like they're losing land that belongs to them.
I think that it's a great idea that was poorly rolled out, and we all learned a lot of valuable lessons from that because there was a ton of enthusiasm behind the concept. We are a bike riding community. We want to be able to get safely from point A to point B on a bike, pushing a stroller, walking a dog, whatever the case may be. What I am encouraging now is that we look at the areas that have little to no impact on people's front yards, because I get it. One thing we were hearing is that's just going to have people coming closer to our house. Even if they do understand that's right of way, it is still giving people kind of the ability to walk right through their yards, and we don't want people to feel that way. So we have a few areas that I'm supporting, which one is a grant-funded area. It's a federal grant to help enhance the pathways to school. So over by San Pablo Elementary and Fletcher Middle School. So that actually needs a lot of work. We just did the National Walk to School Day there, and we walked all the way around. I think it was very strategic for them to have us do that because it was very plain to see that area needs some help with safe pathways to school.
And who participated in that? You say we. Was it the council altogether?
Yeah, so we were all invited to come out. Our police officers, both Jacksonville Beach and Neptune Beach, had representatives there, members of the school board, police department, the entire school, San Pablo Elementary. Every student came and walked with us. So it was great to see. It was a lot of fun, but at the same time, all the city council members were looking around at areas where sidewalks were not maintained, or maybe they just ended, and seeing that we really have a lot of work to do there to ensure a safe passage to school. So the other areas, we're working on Jacksonville Drive. It goes along a really busy road. So we want to continue. There is a small segment of urban trail on Jacksonville Drive, and we want to continue that from South Beach Parkway up to A1A. And then we're also going to talk about First Street, and that's something that we've pushed that off a little bit, but First Street is very, very busy with bike traffic, and we have there was a poor design that was installed before I came into office, just before maybe around 2010, that included some on-street parking that just is not working for us. So instead of kind of trying to fix it with a few little things, we're going to do an overhaul of First Street. That'll be a few years down the road, but I think that's going to be something that's really helpful to people who want to ride their bike, walk down First Street, etc.
Will limiting car traffic be part of that?
I can't say yet because we have not started to have those discussions, but to me, everything is on the table.
All right. Just finally, we were going to have your opponent, Georgette Dumont, on the 22nd of October on First Coast Connect. She's a former beach council member, a colleague in that way. She's been mounting a very strenuous campaign. Just briefly, what are your thoughts about your candidacy versus hers?
So it is easy to take pot shots from the sidelines when you are not in it and you're able to just sit there and point out all the negative. I'm very positive about Jacksonville Beach. I'm positive about our future. We have a lot of great things going on, and I'm really excited for the opportunity to serve another 4 years. I have been in it, and I have the support of our fellow mayors. I have the support of our state representatives and our federal representatives. Those relationships do not come overnight. I'm a proven leader, and I'm looking forward to using that to benefit Jacksonville Beach for the next 4 years.
All right, Mayor Chris Hoffman, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Up next, renowned cellist Dave Eggar.
The First Coast Free Thought Society presents a Zoom screening of Rob Reiner's documentary about the rise of Christian nationalism, God and Country, followed by a conversation. Monday, October 21st, 6:30 p.m. More at fcfs.org. USF Safety Florida, committed to reducing work-related illnesses, injuries, and workers' comp premiums while avoiding OSHA penalties and helping employers profit from safety. More information is available by visiting usfsafetyflorida.com.
Hi, David Brancaccio, host of the Marketplace Morning Report here. You may also remember me anchoring the TV program Now on PBS, and I would be very honored if you could join me and WJCT Public Media President and CEO David McGowan on Wednesday, November the 20th. We'll be on stage in Jacksonville exploring everything from how to make the economy better serve more people to the importance of building community and plenty more. I cannot wait to meet you, so RSVP today
at wjct.org/events.
See you soon.
While the presidential race is getting most of the attention, control of several key state legislatures is also up for grabs, and here's why it matters.
When there's such gridlock at the federal level, policy really gets done within the states. And you see that recognition among a lot of national groups. They are pouring more money into the states than they ever have before.
I'm Anthony Brooks. The key contest for legislative majorities. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
The last month has been devastating, with back-to-back hurricanes Helene and Milton. But according to one recent report, compounding disasters are becoming more common. What do back-to-back disasters mean for how we prepare and our ability to rebuild? That's next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. 5-time Grammy-nominated cellist and composer Dave Eggar takes the stage this Friday for a special evening of music and storytelling. And he's here with two of his fellow musicians to give us a preview. Dave Eggar, thanks for being here.
Hey, Ann, thanks so much for having me back. It's so great to be here.
It's terrific to see you. And your story is so amazing. So you've been playing cello since age 3, and you've got your cello right here with you. What is it about the instrument that really appeals to you and speaks to you?
I think it's just that it has this powerful vocal style. I think I loved the fact that cello can sound like an opera singer, it can sound like a rock singer, it can sound like a jazz singer. And it has, because it has no frets and it has sort of this ability to flow between cultures. I just always felt from when I was a little kid that it sort of was unconquerable. Like you couldn't be perfect because there's no way. It's like quantum mechanics. There's no frets.
What is that for people who aren't musicians like myself? I mean, what is the difference between what is a fretless instrument? Instrument.
So like guitars have these sort of stops that show you where the pitch is, but cello, we can kind of glide around like that. But what it does is it lets you play like European scales, but also other scales like Middle Eastern scales that things like the piano can never play.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So that's always been super exciting for me.
You have worked with Taylor Swift, with
Mhm.
John Legend, with Beyonce, Tony Bennett, Coldplay, but your current project is Bristol Unplugged.
Lightning, yeah.
Lightning Unplugged. So explain what that sound is.
Yeah, so Bristol Lightning, we're playing actually tonight on Friday Music Hall on Thursday, which is a little crazy, at 7:30 tonight. And Phil Faconti's on guitar, Blake Collins is on mandolin. And the last few years, both Phil and I we're both New Yorkers. We've been living and working in Bristol, where we run a studio.
And Bristol is like
It's on the
Tennessee?
Tennessee-Virginia border, and it's where the birthplace of country music is. And it's been very exciting. We've done everything from John Legend's record, BB Rex's record, to we have 5 songs in the new Terrifier film, which is the #1 film in Hollywood, which we made those songs right in Bristol with Phil Anastasia and another whole crew of crazy people. So it's been really exciting. And of course, Bristol being the birthplace of country music and the home of bluegrass, we got very influenced by fusing our New York flavor with something a little bit more down home. And Blake is a many generationed bluegrass expert. And so with him and his sister Jamie and our friend Liasha, we have a bizarre fusion of bluegrass, classical, and urban music. It's pretty awesome. And tonight we're doing the acoustic version.
And so you were clear to say it's Friday Music Hall in Riverside, but it's tonight on
Yeah,
Thursday.
it is
What time?
It is at 7:30. Doors at 7 at Friday Music Hall on Thursday. It's
Something for
hilarious.
everyone. All right. Well, you're going to give us a preview of your performance. What are you going to play?
We're going to play a piece from our new Bristol Lightning EP. This is called Appalachian Wolfgang, and it's a little bluegrass spin. It was originally Blake's idea that we've been messing around with from Mozart's era, where he was fascinated with Middle Eastern music, and he wrote The Abduction from the Seraglio and this Rondo a la Turk.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Dave Eggar, Phil Falconti, and Blake Collin. We're going to let you play us out. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
The Museum of Science and History presents Mission Astronaut, a new exhibition exploring life in space. Mission Astronaut is open September 21st through January 5th. More info at mosh.org.